welcome to the Social World Podcast. I'm Dave Niven, and it's nice to have you with me. Today I'm going to be talking with Anne-Marie Christian, who's an enormously experienced social worker. She's now a consultant, and she's a public speaker, she's an author, and so it's a good person to have on our programme, because we're going to talk a little bit about operational matters today, about frontline stuff, and education eventually, and safeguarding in education, because that's such a huge area of work and area of responsibility for all those that actually are involved in education. So welcome, Anne-Marie, to the programme.
Thank you. Hi, welcome. Welcome to you and everybody listening to this. Thank you for having me.
No, you're very welcome. Now, just tell us a little bit about your own history, how you started in social work and what you've been involved with, and then we'll drift nicely into the whole issue of education safeguarding.
Okay, well, I qualified in 1996 and I did a degree back then as a pilot. Worked really well. I did 2 placements in children and families, and I then, one was a residential unit for young adolescent girls who'd been abused, and the other one was statutory under-8 team, actually, children and families, both in Greater London, which I really enjoyed. And then I kind of I did a generic post, actually. My first, back then I did 2 agency roles as locums, newly qualified, which you would never do now, which I agree with. And then I kind of, I remember my first day, I qualified in July, and by the second week I was, working. I won't name the borough, but I was in court my second day as a newly qualified, and that was definitely a learning curve. But there you go. We're better protected now. But anyway, so then I kind of eventually, after 3 months of being agency, I then got a permanent role, and it was actually a old kind of, when I say old, it was old school. It was more kind of a neighbourhood social work, so it was generic. So I had a team, I had a caseload of all disabilities, child protection, child in need, looked after, even adoption. I had even a few kind of HIV kind of cases as well, so that was really interesting. Like
a sort of smorgasbord of social work.
Yeah, it was lovely. Before people kind of specialised in different teams then, that was a very good experience. I loved that. And then I went for an interesting new kind of initiative, because I worked for a borough where they were kind of linked to national government, where they had lots of new projects and pilot projects. So I went for a pilot project based in a school, in a secondary school in London, and we called it the Inclusion Project, and I started that role in October 99, and I wasn't sure about it, to be honest. And then I remember being kind of feeling a bit isolated from my colleagues, but I was still part of a statutory team. We called it the Adolescent Resource Team back then, and they had a social worker in the PRU, and I was in the school, and they had different kind of outreach ones, and it worked really well. And I was in a team based in this school with a education welfare officer, some learning mentors, and also we went on to do some, back then connections advisors were just also being piloted, which we did at this school too. So it was an amazing role, and I did that for 5 years.
Who were you actually working with, and what were the kind of issues that you were finding?
Okay, so it's interesting. I was still statutory, working for children's social care, but a specialist team. And I was the secondary school. It was co-ed, comprehensive. In a borough with lots of wealth, but also poverty. Like all, should I say? Like every other. Yeah. And we were working with a very multicultural school, lots of different languages. So I remember feeling like I'll never forget this. I felt like a policewoman on a crime scene, because being child protection social worker, I felt that there was lots of vulnerable children in this school who had not yet trusted, so some of them were suffering. You can clearly see that were in abusive kind of situations, whether it was at home or in with their peers. And some of them are very delicate. Some of them had trauma, but they were still functioning quite well, but quite delicate and quite sensitive. And, within the first term, we actually reduced exclusion rate by 1/3. And we actually hit the press, actually. I remember we were in the TES, the Times Education Supplement, and also in community care, because the project was going down really well.
That's a pretty significant number.
Yeah, we were, working with the vulnerable students, the students who were more had a lot going on but couldn't relate to teachers. So we were all kind of, back then in my 20s, I'd say, it was much more kind of a younger, nurturing. They drop into our project, we'd have a chat, they'll offload, we'll correct their behaviours if they were moaning about teachers, or we'll bring them back to lesson. So some of it was kind of direct work. And then I created a year 9 group that I did with some year 9 girls who were low self-esteem. And then every week I used to kind of have a format where I'd meet all the head of years. They talk about their vulnerable students, and it was like early help, but back then, before that CAFS came out, it was quite interesting.
Yeah.
So the good thing about this project, David, was I actually had access to the social care data in the school, so I could log on, and then they created my own kind of team where so it was non-statutory, obviously, because I was on my own as an early help, but I'd open up cases that I was working with in the school. And it's a similar format where I'd get permission from parents to then work with their child, whether it's group work, whether it's even family work, working with the family, going home visits. They come to meet me. Some of it was just teenage turmoil, not understanding your child. And then, that kind of went on to me then saw a role in another borough of managing a service like that, which I went for and I got.
Okay.
And then I was managing social workers in schools, which was another kind of, again, quite new. That was early noughties, should I say, 2003, where I kind of again then, and I just finished my practice teaching award because I had a student in the school that I was also a social work student that was working with me. So I left that role to go straight into this other role for the local authority.
Okay.
And I was like a sort of safeguarding advisor, but also trainer to schools and, signposting them around safeguarding.
Well, let's develop that a little bit, because, I mean, the same themes are around today. It's just, we've got different information, different knowledge, and we've experienced all sorts of different things, and we've still got challenges that come out of every corner by the sound of it. But, I mean, so you developed it now, and you moved on then, right? And you had your own team, but you must have been noticing changes in how the schools were responding to safeguarding.
Yeah, so yes and no, I suppose. I suppose the new role I went for, David, is interesting. The guy who employed me, he created the job, and he was very much an inclusive guy. He really was kind of wanted. He could see that there was a gap. There was almost no communication between social care and education, and this role that I was in, I remember him at the interview telling me it was to bridge the gap between children's social care and education, and that's what the role was. And that's still the case now. I definitely agree with that. There's still an issue between how social workers kind of appreciate and understand the systems in education, schools, but also for schools to then also still understand our processes in social care. So I'm proud to say that I'm a converted social worker, but also very much into and understanding our colleagues in education with their frustrations, but also their systems and their acronyms as well. So, I remember being in the new role and it working very, very well, being very successful. And I remember in supervision once, my manager saying something to me, and I said, basically, I put it down to the language that we use sometimes. It's just simple language. So what was quite common at the start, David, was schools would ring me and offload and tell me their concerns and say they've rang social care and they hadn't taken the referral on. I would then talk further with the school and get to the bottom and the detail of the case. And then I transform it into a language which a social worker then would understand. Example being, the child's beyond parental control. Yeah. Or we're concerned about the welfare of this child based on the mum's well-being. Do you understand? So that was quite straightforward for me. And then they would get the referrals that were then going into social care via myself. Not all of them, but the ones that they were struggling with. And likewise, social workers would call me to communicate with schools because they found that they weren't understanding the request, or, they weren't forthcoming with information. And it was all about trust. And it was all about kind of being in control of the information you're sharing. It was quite an interesting
It sounds like you were a translation and support service.
Yeah, it was interesting, but I think it was schools were kind of delicate about they weren't very confident back then in kind of sharing all of the grey information. And I'm proud to say that we've now got keeping children safe in education. 2016, which is in the process of being amended for September 18. The consultation's out now and it closes in 22nd of this month. But I remember, we now know in education in schools that they are more confident when we kind of talk about the lower level concerns, the kind of, I call it the drips, the kind of slow feeding ones where it's neglect, emotional abuse, things are going on. There's more little indicators, but they all add up to a massive concern. And they're much better now at identifying that and referring in. And I think that's what I used to kind of go to back then, was the emotional neglect ones were the harder ones at schools. Were very frustrated. And there were a lot of them, they were emotionally involved as well. So they would emotionally get upset about it too, which I used to take out as well.
Well, I think that's fair enough. I mean, let me ask you a few things that might sort of resonate with you. From my point of view, schools often see children more waking hours than their parents do. And therefore, in terms of actual recognition of any changes, any kind of worries or any behavioural alteration, whatever, they're there on the front line, and not just the teaching staff, obviously, but the whole school. You're talking the janitorial staff, the catering staff, everybody. And you know as well as I do that when you go to safeguard the training in schools, you've got to include the whole school, because children aren't entirely predictable about who they would disclose something to or who they could be noticed by.
Absolutely.
So given that as a sort of a fact, with also the new legislation or the way that schools are now, they're kind of less under the control of, say, local authorities or others. It's only really the school commissioners, if that, and the governing bodies. Do you feel that separation has been a healthy thing for safeguarding, or is it more of a challenge?
Since the MATs, the multi-academy trusts, have crept in, and I think the first time I knew of those was kind of 2008, 2009, when they were creeping in. And then I saw the services in like the LEA, then the Local Education Authority, was shrinking, and then it almost went back into local authority, and then that was shrinking further to lots of schools converting to academies. And obviously, like you're saying, schools taking on their own responsibilities around safeguarding. Obviously, we've got the LSCBs, which we know that they have to adhere to around policies.
That's the Safeguarding Children Board.
Local Safeguarding Children's Board, that kind of set the procedures and the protocols locally in every separate local authority. So they've always known that they have to go via that. Hence, that's part of the local authority they have to work with. But I have seen across the country, David, that it's very kind of, it varies from very weak to very positive. I was in a setting just recently, start of this year actually, where I was surprised. I've had, I've had a few very shocking stories actually, but one of them was, so at the moment in education, they have to have annual child protection training. And
really?
a headmaster, yes.
I thought it was 3 years.
No, it's annual. Keeping Children Safe says annual child protection training. So that changed in September 2016. And a colleague, headmaster in a school from a very good borough, should I say, said to me that he was told a fortnight ago, and this is actually the third week in Jan, that by the local authority, by the LSCB, actually, the Local Safeguarding Children's Board, that they only need 3 annual, the training every 3 years. So, and I've heard some, so I have seen more so than not, very kind of inconsistent but out of date kind of safeguarding advice given to education.
Let's hold that thought just for a second, because I'm interested in this, because I think maybe where the confusion arises is I would be one of the ones that would say that every 3 years is what they're doing, but
no.
But hang on. But in the intervening time, they're doing e-learning, and they're calling that adequate. Now that's where I fall out. I think it should be human-based learning every year.
It's not e-learning. So again, inspectors. So one of my roles, I work with an inspectorate body and work with inspectors. and I've got kind of access to one of their checklists. And on there, they are very particular about it has to be face-to-face training. So some, I'm not going to mention names, but some schools buy into, there is a national kind of, there's quite a few national organisations that sell child protection training licenses online. But inspectors query that because they want it to be preferably delivered by the designated safeguarding lead. And the designated safeguarding lead, we call the DSL, and in that document called Keeping Children Safe in Education, it's very clear that every education establishment has to have a DSL and a DSL deputy, okay? Has to have them. And they are the person responsible for child protection in that school, meaning updating the policy annually, which they have to do annually. Also, raising the profile of child protection, doing a mandatory child protection training for new staff on induction, but also overseeing safer recruitment too. And part of that is delivering child protection training. So, you know, most schools I know, I would say at least 85 to 90% of colleagues that I know in education, the DSL would provide that child protection training at the inset days. So normally, so years ago, I knew of schools doing it about for half an hour, but now we expect at least 2.5 to 3 hours on child protection in the September inset, and then also maybe an hour or so reminders for the January and Easter insets. So they're very quite, you know, they're quite intense as far as child protection being a massive. They've learned a lot from serious case reviews. And in one of my roles, I worked with the school improvement team, David, where we did behaviour and safety reviews. And in that role, I also used to do Ofsted complaints on behalf of the local authority. And we'd go in and we were quite vigorous in child protection. And anyone in education now will tell you that safeguarding is a top of the agenda for, you know, inspection.
Let me ask you this then, because, I mean, you will know this, but just for the sake of people listening, the new Children's Social Work Act that's come into place and the review of local safeguarding children boards, in fact, the dissolution of local safeguarding children boards into morphing into yet another kind of shape, says that there has to be 3 primary partners, health, police and local authority. The obvious missing, so the seat but nobody sitting on it at the table, essentially in the primary sense, at core people, is education. And yet the new working together, which you know but people might not, is essentially the kind of Bible for multi-agency kind of safeguarding, says that there should be a strong relationship with schools and with regional school commissioners, and that arrangements must contain explicit reference how partners plan to involve schools and academies in their work. Now, if it's that important, and what you've just been saying and what I've understood for years has been the vital importance of schools in safeguarding, it sounds like they're being kind of downgraded. Would you agree?
I totally agree. So keeping children safe. So keeping children safe was born out of working together. Okay, so working together was first, and that set the kind of standards for everybody in any organisation that works with children in relation to the expectations of a safeguarding lead, a policy and training and vetting. Keeping children safe is specifically for colleges, maintained schools and also general schools, okay? And it's all about safeguarding. So when it first came out, it was in 2015, they amended it at least 4 times, and then they changed it a lot in September 2016. And with those big changes came the annual child protection training, and also these requirements. So going back to your question, the fact that in schools they've really heightened and strengthened child protection because we know that they are the only people that see children 5 days a week, 12 years at least at a time, based on your whole school career. They're best placed to see. And, you know, social workers, we were given cases. We didn't know the families. We were strangers. We built up trust. You know, you might see a child at the max, 4-5 times in an assessment, depending on the nature of the case. and then we close cases and they go back to school. So it saddened me to see that they have forgotten our colleagues in education, because one of the things that I do in my kind of independent role, I really empower the safeguarding leads to be confident and also, be responsible for their position as a safeguarding lead. Okay. And challenge.
Well, now, where you work, obviously, you're advising them what you've just told me, and where I work, I know that schools are given high priority in terms of partnership, with local authority and others. But obviously, it's curate's egg, it's patchy all over the country.
Definitely.
I think the Department for Education, I'm not sure. I mean, with the safeguarding boards and their replacements and the advice that's going out there, I mean, those of us who chair boards feel that of the about 150 boards across sort of England and Wales, you could get 150 models if you're not careful.
Or none. I mean, don't forget that they could be scrapped.
Well, yeah, but they're having multi-agency
multi-local arrangements. So, the local arrangements. Yeah.
I mean, I've been there before. I kind of qualified a little bit before you, and I think I remember area child protection committees.
Yeah, ACPCs. Yeah.
Yeah, and the irony is that we're almost going back to that kind of presentation. With ACPCs, although the agenda is twice as long and the actual work that are now involved with safeguarding is twice as much, because so many new areas of concern have arisen. The whole issue of child sexual exploitation, modern day slavery, female genital mutilation,
children missing education,
the prevent agenda about radicalisation, and so on. I mean, all of that's hit the table, as well as the main issues that always have been there, neglect and so forth. So, given a higher agenda, given a higher work rate, given more responsibility, giving fewer funding, it is even more stretched, in my view, these days, to enable us to do the work, those of us who are passionate about keeping children safe. So where do you think it's going?
It's going to be, I think, like you're absolutely right, David, it's going to go back. I mean, where we've come a long way in the last 10 years. I mean, we've had serious case reviews, I know that, but I in the field of being in education that I've been in for the last, since 17 years, I have seen a gradual movement of education being a bit more integrated into children's social care. And it's very sad to see that I think this kind of recent changes within the kind of government changes of whether it's guidance or, like you said, this new bill that's coming in, the Act. For me, we are going backwards. It's going to kind of remove or make schools a bit more remote as far as their involvement in child protection. It might be a bit of a tick box, but keeping children safe it's interesting, actually, because that kind of drives them. But I don't think this new bill, the Children's Social Act, complements the Keeping Children Safe guidance. That makes sense, because where that gives them a lot of ammunition to kind of be confident and work with child protection safeguarding as part of that multi-agency network, as you can see, they're not down as one of those people who are one of the key partners, even though that they are one of the most important because of the nature of their contact with children. Okay,
well, look, given what you just said, and the requirements, and you used the key word there, the Keeping Children Safe guidance. What statutory requirements are there if they don't comply?
Well, obviously, we know that, mandatory reporting, we're not there yet. So I'll park that one there.
No, not yet.
But schools are good with, I know of a few schools where people have failed to pass on information regarding child protection, and therefore that person would have breached the child protection policy under the information sharing guidance of 2015. So internally, I know schools are doing their own things, because they do take it very seriously, most of the ones that I know or have involvement with. But generally, I think, it's one where I think, legally, they've got the Children's Act 1989, the welfare of the child being paramount. Schools are very aware about the whole thing about liaising with multi-agency safeguarding hubs and, reporting child abuse under the Act as far as, sharing information, the welfare of the child, multi-agency working. So that will, I honestly believe, personally, that will continue. I really don't think, because now they've almost been woken as far as the converted in understanding child protection better because of this last few years with the Keeping Children Safe guidance. I doubt if they're going to go back, they're going to step down from that, because they really have stepped up as far as understanding the games that families play, really good at resources at getting children to disclose. This annual training is normally updated, but also there's something in Keeping Children Safe, David, where the safeguarding lead has to also update staff regularly anyway via email, bulletin or newsletter. So not only do they get annual training, they then have to get, every few weeks, child protection updates, information about other things, whether it's sexting or, like you mentioned, prevent or FGM, or whether it's about a latest case on the press. So they are, safeguarding. They all have sort of safeguarding pages on their websites. They have safeguarding boards in their staff rooms. They have pictures of the safeguarding lead. They have posters about whistleblowing. So they've really stepped into this world of, it could happen here approach.
And they have the support of the local Safeguarding Children Board and its successors. I mean, because they're an integral part of that. With the every board has its education subcommittee, usually chaired by a prominent head teacher or whatever.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So there is sort of, if you like, a bank of support around. It's just a question of making sure people realise that there are degrees of excellence that they can tap into.
Yeah, and also create their own. So it's interesting. The last few years, I've seen a lot of colleagues in schools go back to the old clusters. Schools working in clusters again because of the deficit and also the money issues. They're buying in services and sharing it between them. Whether it's a counsellor, whether it's an art therapist or play therapist or music therapist or, parenting work. They're doing that. So they are kind of working together in partnership with each other.
What message would you give to young social workers or newly qualified social workers? They needn't be young, but newly qualified social workers coming through now that might be looking at something within the kind of partnership with education field, to work in? Would you give them advice that this is a good place to work?
It's for a newly qualified person, it's quite isolating. So I would encourage a newly qualified person to go down that route of getting that child protection experience first within the statutory kind of, organisations first, because you need to kind of understand the processes and systems internally. And then I think, because when you are working with child protection education, it's very isolating. So when I did my first role in the 90s, the first thing I did feel very remote as far as people not understanding my standards of kind of, example, what the first thing that we do in social work is non-discriminatory practice. Everything we do is about race, culture, religion, children's feelings, wishes and feelings into account. Other colleagues didn't really get that as far as we did, seeing the child as an individual. So when I had my supervision and my team meetings, I felt like part of that network again. But on a day-to-day basis, it was very isolating. I actually was invited to write a chapter in a book, Becoming a Social Worker, about that role in the school, if anyone's interested in that, with my old maiden name, Howell, Anne-Marie Howell. So there was a whole chapter about my experience working in the school.
Don't worry, we're going to put your contact details on the podcast, on the text side of it.
Yeah, but it's very isolating. And there are lots of, I have got actually a few social workers that I actually supervise that are in schools, what I currently do. And we have supervision. And, one of them isn't a safeguarding lead, but she's clearly in the school. It's demanding school with lots of kind of, disaffected children, a lot of child protection. So she works and does early help in that school. She kind of does group work. She works with families. She attends social care meetings, and she loves it actually, because she's she's in her late 20s and she can relate to the young people as well. It's like a big sister kind of person, and she understands the dilemmas they're facing in relation to young people, and it's working quite well. So it depends on the individual, but it is very isolating. I mean, you have to kind of go out your way to keep up to date with child protection and social work. So I do that myself. Okay. I'm an independent one, but I know I've got I belong to various national bodies, where professional bodies where I get my social work kind of practice from and my updates.
Well, look,
But
just before, I mean, we're down to the last couple of questions here, and I want to make sure that I get a chance to kind of give you a chance to give your messages out, if you like, at the end
mhm,
about what you think should be, could be, would, etc. But just before, there is something that I have always been involved with through all my working life, and where it crosses into the education world would be special educational needs.
mhm,
And those schools that cater for challenging young people or young people that have got special educational needs. Now, we know that issues to do with safeguarding children with disabilities, for example, the proportion within the community has hardly changed of those who are abused since about the 50s, the
mhm,
1950s. And it has always seemed to me fairly scandalous that, the old figure of sort of 3 times as many children with
mm.
disabilities are abused as children without disabilities, proportionate to their numbers in the population. But that's never changing. And do you see much movement within schools and other educational establishments catering for special educational needs in this? Because it doesn't seem to be changing as far as I can see.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that because I see that you get a certain type of person who works in SEN in special education kind of schools. So you've got there's severe schools where you've got non-verbal children, severely disabled, and then combined with kind of invisible disabilities. And I've like you, I've from the start of my career, I've always had working in partnership with various schools, and I've got a few that I do quite regularly because of my passion and, like you, understanding in helping them to raise that profile. And again, it goes back to the ones where the majority of them understand the voice of the child, understand the communication difficulties, and understand sometimes the dilemmas that go into the parent and how sometimes it can be stressful, the thin line between good enough parenting, the whole thing about being dependent on carers and all the other things. So they are more alert and but then also empathize with the challenges that come with that.
Hmm.
And they're much more engaging, and they've got more resources. They work in partnership with health, and they're very strict. For example, a lot of the ones I know have banned mobile phones from their schools because obviously, most of these children have to be relied on to be changed around intimate care. And obviously, by banning the phones, you're just encouraging people to take advantage of people like that. Do you understand? But in saying that, though, David, to my surprise, 2 years ago, I was invited to go to a school. A colleague of mine had just taken the new headship and invited me to the new school, and it was shocking. So, you're talking about not that long ago, as an old school kind of real children being tied down. It was very sad, very sad. It had been dealt with appropriately after we found out, but there were some still practices
Hmm.
going on where children weren't being like there was a room with a padding in it where children were locked in to when they were lashing out. So I hope there's not a lot of those still, but majority of SEN schools that I do know are very kind of passionate and go the extra mile to ensure that they
Yeah.
keep these children safe and pick up all the early signs. They're very good at questioning, but sometimes again, like as you know, social workers, we have supervision. We check ourselves as far as our emotional involvement and good enough what's happening in cases. And I think sometimes in those settings, it does blur in relation to
Yeah.
understanding the challenges from a family's point of view to, is this child being neglected or
Yeah.
scapegoated? Do you know what I mean?
I do.
They,
Well, we're never
yeah,
going to eradicate abuse
no,
anywhere, and
yeah,
schools are no exception. I just think that
mm,
our best bet is to hope that we are actually reducing significantly the opportunities for abuse, because
yeah,
there'll always
definitely.
be people that want to hurt children.
Hmm.
Now, lastly, really, Anne Marie, I'm very keen that the way the world is going, like the world's turning digital.
Hmm.
And the world is turning into much more of the way that people get their information is so much more kind of, is some form of media or another. It's very, the traditional ways of actually sharing information seem to be reducing, and everything seems to be online these days. And that's why I was having a little bit of a dig about e-learning earlier on, although I know there is some significantly good e-learning that goes on. But it's not entirely good. So, where do you think the future lies in terms of social work and safeguarding when it comes to the digital world? I mean, you're getting all sorts of ways now of intervening with social work service users now. Whether it's going to be what we're doing, we're talking remotely and recording this. There could be social workers doing visits online instead of in person. There could be seminars going on or webinars going on to do with instead of face-to-face training. There's all sorts of other stuff happening, and people are getting most of their information from websites or from apps and so forth. Do you see that burgeoning in terms of actually getting really quite overwhelming, and the whole process of social work becoming much more digital rather than personal?
Yeah, I can see it going that way. I don't necessarily agree with it. So the only time, because I do work with international schools, and there are times when we Skype, because obviously you're in a remote part of the world, and I can understand how that can work, because obviously it's conversations and having a meeting online. So I appreciate that, but then eventually you may meet if it's an ongoing issue, is in some way. But generally, I can see how, I know quite a few local authorities have tablets now, as in computer tablets, where they'll take them to home visits and complete forms at home to get people to sign online. And I understand that it's happening now, and it works in the favour of the social worker, meaning when they go back to the office, the notes are already done. But there's lots of issues there around data protection, if that's been lost, blah, blah, blah. But it's not very personal anyway when you're kind of talking to a screen rather than actually doing a home visit and assessing, observing, and interactions.
I think
so
that's
I'm
more
kind of old school.
important, isn't it? Sorry to interrupt you, but just to say, more important now, but for us in the Western industrialized countries, because you talked about international schools there. I mean, for me, social work in Western industrialized countries is more on a one-to-one level or a one-to-a-family level, whereas in the other parts of the world, social work's all about communities.
And yeah, it's very different. You're absolutely right. So, what I like to see, as in professionally, is the personal touch, as far as that individual, on the individual needs being met, focusing in for that period of time on that family, on the lived experience of the child. Everything has to be alert, and it goes back to, I remember a powerful exercise that I did many years ago, and as a student social worker, of observing a child, who's young, couldn't talk, baby, and the power in even an hour's observation of just watching and seeing interactions and dynamics and systems in families is amazing. You get so much from that, as far as intelligence about what's happening around this child, the emotional warmth, the secure network, and all those things. And that will be missed, I think. So I am old school. I do believe in good old-fashioned, go out, dedicate that time or that hour to that family, to intervene, to be available emotionally, to pick up on all the things that you have to, and then again making time after to complete your notes. But I don't agree with e-learning. Don't get me wrong. I think when I worked for the local authority, I did the data protection online, and I did my kind of those things I can understand online, because that's very much about processes. But when it comes to real child protection, safeguarding issues, I don't agree with. You can't provoke people. You can't provoke people's.
You can't answer the nuanced questions.
Yeah, you can't. It's very hypothetical as far.
Well, there's one more thing.
Rather than actually.
One more thing, Anne-Marie. Just I've got to pick up before I forget with what you just said there, because I really do agree with it. And somebody has been on this program a couple of times, Professor Harry Ferguson, who's written a couple of books on child protection, and he's very, very sort of well thought of in the field. He spent a year with child protection teams embedded in a local authority in a big city, and they followed social workers out. And one of the things he noticed was the real reduction in the fact that social workers who go out to visit children don't take with them any more toys or pencils or pens or colouring books or anything to engage children. And it's really kind of the whole idea of kind of bureaucracy and, kind of formulaic visiting times. It's not. He wasn't critical of a lot of the good work that went on, but what he was saying is that we've lost something. We've lost something here in terms of so many social workers who work with children want to come into the profession to do face-to-face work.
I know.
And that's really been suffering, hasn't it?
Yeah, like going back to what you said, when I first qualified, I used to do direct work with children, felt tips, teddy bears, clay, sand, you name it. We had, they'd come into the office and we had a playroom, or I'd do home visits with my little bucket where I'd have in the back of my car in my boot, I had my little plastic containers, knowing that I was visiting certain children. We had stationery cupboard with stuff in, but I actually bought my own. And I still have, actually. So even in the job I do now as a sort of safeguarding consultant, I have toys. So the other day I bought, ones about feelings, angry, happy, sad, confused. And I really do encourage colleagues to, when they're trying to work with young people, to use, there's a worry monster that I've got as well, that encouraging young people to communicate and offload their worries, which triggers, obviously, children telling you about how they're feeling, which could be abused. So it's really important that you are approachable, like you said, and the whole thing about being child-centered, but child-friendly. What do children like? They like little squidgy kind of toys, things that make them laugh, not pieces of paper and pens. No. I understand we have to do that part, but we have to also be approachable and build that rapport with that young person.
Totally agree.
That they can, that they, even if, putty or what do you call it, spinners. But don't get me wrong, David, health and safety has gone so mad now that I can imagine everything would have to be assessed.
I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. But just before I get to your last couple of words, okay? I do remember, you just made me think of something there. I remember there was quite a fashion at some point there for working with what we called anatomically correct dolls.
Yes.
But I always remembered that the sheer kind of amusement amongst the social workers that I was working with when they actually came out and started working with them. Because the anatomically correct dolls that we were sort of working with children with had no ears.
Oh, okay.
And, in a sense, that was some of the things that the children first picked up on, and it was just an incredible oversight. Anyway, look, I want to ask you just to say one sentence, because we're very, very close to the end of the program. One or two sentences about why you think that social work is still a good profession for people now considering their future.
Because we make a difference to lots of people's lives. We believe, we don't like injustice. We believe in empowering people. We appreciate that people may be vulnerable at any time in their life, but they can get over that and move on with the right support and help. And, I like to say this, it's okay not to be okay. No one's perfect. We're not robots. Whether you're a parent or not a parent, I think it's all about working with people to let them understand that no one's judging them. We accept who you are and how you are, but we can work with you and support you through it. So I've always loved that part of social work. It's very much about empowering people and being non-discriminatory too. Hence, we're quite inclusive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, it's all right. I just have to. Sadly, I could go on talking all night to you, but I've got to bring the program to a close. But
right, that's fine.
Anne-Marie Christian, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you very much, David.
Your contact details I'll put in the text at the podcast.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you very much.